One of the worst feelings as a football fan is watching your favorite player slowly get taken down by Father Time. And what always makes matters worse is when your favorite footballer then makes a move from your favorite club to MLS. This usually really feels like the final nail in the coffin. As football develops throughout the years, the destinations that aging footballers take are always pretty different. Most mid-tier footballers who usually fall under the streets will never forget category tend to end up playing for their boyhood team, or at least the club that they were at when they first broke through. But it's our favorite players, the legends of the game, who usually make their way to more lucrative leagues. And by lucrative, realistically, I mean well paying, if we're being honest. At this point, they've completely dropped the loyalty gimmick and they're just chasing a bag. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Japan, and the destination I wanted to take a look at today is MLS. MLS stands out amongst those other leagues for a couple of reasons. It's a relatively younger league since it only just turned 30 last December, meaning it has officially reached UNC status, by the way. It has a completely different league system with 2 conferences and playoffs, and the quality of the league is a very mixed bag. You have some players who are very young and promising, and then you have some players who are either young and terrible or old and terrible. With MLS having this odd reputation of being a league that hosts so many legends before their retirement, yet parading itself as attempting to challenge the status quo of football, I wanted to take a look into a couple of football icons who did make the choice to go to MLS and see how well they did in the United States to see if they flopped or not. And real quick boys, if you're new to the channel, enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Please subscribe, helps the channel out a ton. Weekly video essays, weekly FC25 content as well. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you on for another video. And real quick, I did want to put a definition on what I mean by a flop. I'll be qualifying someone as a flop, not necessarily just based on how they performed in a numerical standpoint, so goals and assists, but rather how much of an impact they really made on the team that signed them, as well as the general culture of MLS, to see how much they really provided, not only to the team, but to the surrounding environment and to the league. MLS teams often heavily rely on their star signings, which are also known as designated players, but that's a whole separate topic that I could get into in a whole different video, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. But that means we do have to see how important these guys were for their team, again from a result and cultural standpoint. Also, it's my channel, so if I want to say someone flopped, then they flopped. So we're gonna start off with Chelsea's best ever manager, who found himself finishing off his playing career in New York. The idea of Frank Lampard finding himself in a bodega asking for a chopped cheese the Aki way is something that really fills me with a lot of joy. Lampard made the move to New York City FC in July of 2014 to be a part of their inaugural MLS season in 2015. And here comes Man City to add some controversy into the mix. Once Lampard was signed by New York FC, he was then loaned out to Man City until the January window. That was very much a trip, seeing Frank Lampard, who has just spent so much of his career now playing for City. I'm not gonna lie, as a rival fan, it was absolutely hilarious. However, once January came around, Man City wanted to try and keep Lampard because Man City and New York City FC are under the same sports group. Apparently, Lampard never actually signed for New York City FC. He kind of just gave him his word that he was going to join them when the time came. But technically, he was never under contract there. Lampard would end up staying with City throughout the rest of the season and would officially sign his New York City contract in July of 2015 and would join halfway through that inaugural season, even more showing how MLS was still being treated as this joke of a league. Lampard literally just hit them with the yeah, sure, I'll join you, and didn't really even tell them when he was going to join. When he did finally join them halfway through their first season, he was nursing an injury, so he didn't even step onto the field until August 1st, where he would make just a 21-minute cameo in a 3-2 loss. The remainder of the season wasn't really any more impressive for Lampard or for New York City FC. Lampard would end up missing 3 more games due to injury, and the team would lose 6 out of 11 of their final matches in the season, meaning they'd miss out on the playoffs. So you have Lampard, this Premier League legend, coming to the club, midfield maestro, inaugural season, trying to give the fans something to root for, and the guy misses pretty much a ton of games and the team doesn't even make playoffs. Great job, Lampard. Almost just as good as your manager career has gone so far. Lampard did manage to accumulate some goals and assists, and he did drag New York City FC to a win against Vancouver, but he did miss a large majority of the season because he decided to stay at City instead, and this was something that did stick with New York City fans. Going into his second season in New York, Lampard had a chance to redeem himself and give this new fan base something to really cheer about. Behind the scenes, it is said that Lampard had a very good effect on his teammates, as he would prove to be a commanding voice and a leader in the locker room, and I'm sure just being around the likes of Lampard in training and in the locker room just kind of makes you want to play better and make you apply yourself more, not only as a teammate, but individually from a technical standpoint. It really just raises the bar. And this was something that the then manager Patrick Vieira was very adamant about as well. However, again, as much as Lampard might have been a good figure behind the scenes, the guy was never really on the pitch. He would go on to miss the first 11 games of the season due to injury, and as a result, New York would only win 4 of those games, and his first game back was against their New York City rivals, New York Red Bulls. This was a game where Lampard made a 15-minute cameo and they lost 7-0. This result felt disastrous for the club, and it felt that the fans were beginning to lose patience. Lampard and New York City FC would be booed off the pitch, and things definitely looked gloomy for the brand new club. To be fair, Lampard returning to the squad would be a catalyst for a second place finish. His midfield presence and goal scoring ability that he was renowned for was present more than ever, and he would consistently rock up with vital goals for the club once he was on the pitch. He even managed to score New York City FC's first ever MLS hat-trick when they dismantled Colorado 5-1. With the club making the playoffs this time around, there was high hopes to see what this new club could accomplish. And then they would go on to drop 2 back-to-back disaster classes. Lampard would of course miss the first game, where they would lose 2-0 to Toronto, and then would return to drop a lackluster performance in the second leg, which they lost 5-0. This would be Lampard's final game with New York City FC and his final game of football ever. And it really encapsulates everything that went wrong with his time there. After such a promise of having this legend of the game, a dominant midfielder known for his ability to control games, his goal scoring ability, New York would be let down by the fact that this guy never really wanted to be there. He would be great for them when he would show up, as I mentioned, but his inability to be there for them consistently would ultimately come back to haunt them. For that reason, I'd consider Lampard's time in MLS a flop. In June 2018, Wayne Rooney would sign for one of the worst teams in MLS with DC United. Rooney, who was definitely long past his glory days with Manchester United, was coming off a relatively lackluster second spell with his boyhood club, Everton. But despite the fact that Rooney was well past it was still a very odd choice for Rooney to pick the worst MLS team to go to out of all of them. But for Rooney, he felt that DC was going to be a project that he could really get behind and prove to be a vital role in the resurgence of this club. For DC United, they were getting a new stadium, there was this feeling of turning a new leaf and a new chapter, and Rooney was going to be the person who, put pen to paper and really began this chapter strongly. So for DC United, they were acquiring a much slower and weathered Rooney, so there was definitely question marks on whether his transfer would make sense for the club. Well, Rooney would make his debut at the same time that DC United would unveil their brand new stadium, and he would manage to register an assist that would make the scoreline 3-0. Up until Rooney got integrated with the squad, DC United managed to win only 2 of their opening 19 games, which further emphasizes just how much he was committed to the grind. Rooney had asked his landlord for an increase in rent or something, because the man was committed to turning this freaking disaster of a club around. After just a handful of games, Rooney would be given the captain armband, and he never really looked back. He would absolutely take the MLS by storm, and it was clear that he was really there to impose himself on the league and drag this DC team to glory. Registering 12 goals and 6 assists in his first season with the club, he even managed that glorious moment where he tracked back to stop a counterattack with the game tied, and then proceeded to chuck in a cross that would result in the game winner at the death of the game. DC and Rooney would unfortunately go out in the first round of the playoffs, but they could still leave the season with their heads held high because they managed to turn this season around drastically. In Rooney's second and final season in MLS, he would continue to push DC to make sure that they didn't drop back to the levels that they had dropped to before his arrival. As the captain of the club again in his second season, a couple of highlights for Rooney this season would see him score a hat-trick, score his 300th career goal, and score from beyond the halfway line for the 3rd time in his career. This wasn't the prettiest season, as DC would actually end up dropping 1 league position from the last, but overall they would still make the playoffs for a 2nd season in a row, and Rooney would finish with 13 goals and 8 assists in 31 games. Rooney had a massive effect on DC United. He would prove to be the heartbeat of the team, and he would constantly be pushing for them to perform better week after week. Like I mentioned earlier, he literally was joining one of the worst teams, and he dragged them to 2 consecutive playoff appearances. That is probably no easy feat. DC probably had their talented players around Rooney, but the fact that he was also able to contribute to that team to the fact that he did was incredible. And then after he left the club, they would struggle to make the playoffs, which goes to show how his presence in the team was extremely vital. Hence, I will label Rooney's time in MLS a success. He dragged this terrible team into the playoffs, he performed well statistically, and he went into this league willing to give it his all and buy into what our teams are doing. After ending his Liverpool career in probably the most embarrassing fashion possible, Gerrard would join Galaxy in the summer of 2015. And when I mean ended his Liverpool career as embarrassingly as possible, I mean it. In his final match for Liverpool, he would get his back blown out and was given a pity goal by Stoke City to never be my midfield GOAT. Anyways, Gerrard will join LA Galaxy after the 14-15 Premier League season ended. For those who don't know, Galaxy is one of the sides who typically go through their ups and downs, but have always managed to be successful in MLS and managed to draw top talent to the club. Gerrard was now going to be part of this winning MLS franchise, and fair enough, his first season wouldn't actually go too bad, and in his first game, he would announce himself to MLS with 1 goal and 2 assists and a 5-2 pounding of the San San Jose Earthquakes. From here, Galaxy would essentially coast to a playoff spot, but they would unfortunately see an early exit at the hands of the Sounders. From here, eyes would be on Gerrard to see how well he would do in his final season as a footballer with Galaxy. Well, it was a major season of ups and downs, which meant it was a big regression from his first campaign with Galaxy. Despite registering 11 assists and 3 goals in 21 league games, Gerrard would also find himself missing countless matches due to injury, which somewhat mirrored what happened with his English compatriot Lampard in New York. Even though he did show up in the assist department, fans quickly grew tired with Gerrard because of the fact that he was hardly on the pitch. Galaxy would make playoffs again and even made it to the semifinals, but would end up falling just short. And by the end of his tenure in LA, many people became fed up with Gerrard, especially because of how his injuries had drastically drained him of his footballing ability and really relegated him to a sideline player for what felt like the entire season. Aside from this, Gerrard never really made an insane impact on Galaxy or the culture of football here in the US. He joined an already historically good franchise and didn't really make himself stand out in any way. For me, Gerrard's time in LA would be considered a flop. He was brought as the marquee player and yet more so felt like he was a bystander of Galaxy's already present success. Compare that to Rooney, who was at this terrible club and then dragged them to a playoff spot. Gerrard never really felt that way, and neither did Lampard. So again, Gerrard the flop. Now it's time to talk about the man who made pretty much everything I just talked about possible. Of course, it's Chicharito. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's David Beckham. In all honesty, Beckham's time, regardless of what anyone thinks, was a massive success for various reasons. But first, why did Beckham even join Galaxy in the first place? Coming fresh off a relatively unsuccessful Galacticos period with Madrid, and having already tasted so much success with Manchester United, Beckham was at a point in his career where, in all honesty, he was probably going to be happy wherever he went. And why not go to the place that offered him the most lucrative deal by a big margin? Not only was Beckham going to be paid handsomely for his time in Los Angeles, but for the first time ever, he was pretty much guaranteed an MLS franchise once he stopped playing. So for those who don't know, in order to get into MLS as a football team here in the United States, there's no relegation, there's no promotion, you have to pretty much buy your way in. The most recent team that joined was San Diego FC, who had to pay a whopping $500 million in order to be a part of MLS. David Beckham, as part of his contract, was able to acquire or pretty much create his own MLS team for $25 million. This was a deal that was given to him in 2007. The guy didn't create his team until a couple of years ago. We saw it with Inter Miami, we saw it with Messi. He got the deal of a lifetime. He got the most insane deal ever. How could he pass this up? The guy wasn't even finished with his career and he got this lucrative of a deal. He would have been a fool to pass it up. With the arrival of David Beckham, there was also changes to the rules here with MLS. Pretty much created a designated player rule, which allows MLS teams who typically have salary caps, meaning they can't go over this specific budget that they have set for their signings, to sign 3 designated players which don't count towards their salary cap. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, Gerrard was a designated player, so was Rooney, so was Lampard, so all these guys didn't actually count towards their team's salary cap. Beckham was the first one. Some people also call it the Beckham rule for that reason, but he instantly changed the MLS with that. All eyes were on this guy, all eyes were on Galaxy. The exposure to the league grew massively. The feeling of him going to MLS at that point was insane. So that's just from a cultural standpoint, right? Changed the rules, he earned himself his own MLS team, but even from a numerical standpoint, Beckham killed it here. He would manage to win 2 supporter shields, which if you don't know, that essentially means you were the best team in the regular season before playoff starts, so he got 2 of those, and then he managed 2 MLS championships in his time as well. And then from an individual standpoint, his first season wasn't as successful because he wasn't actually in the squad for most of the time. He would manage 2 assists in 5 games, which is still pretty good, right? But from here, it kind of just kicked off. The next season, he would see 5 goals and 8 assists in 25 games. To follow that up, he had 2 goals, 2 assists in 11 games. Follow that up, he had 2 goals, 1 assist in 7 games. Follow that up, he had 2 goals and 13 assists in 26 games. And his penultimate season with 7 goals, 6 assists in 24 games, which for a midfielder, these are pretty good stats. I know I gave Lampard and Gerrard stick for not playing every single game that they were able to play, right? Injuries and such. And I know with David Beckham, we had some injuries. He wasn't the youngest player in the world. He was missing games. But again, the commercial success that he brought to not only the MLS, but his team in Galaxy was massive. And again, when he was playing, he was giving this team success. He would also go on loan twice to Milan during his time with Galaxy, but that was, I think, more so for him to stay fresh and still continue to challenge himself. Throughout all this, he would still be a part of Galaxy squad when the time came around. He wouldn't play every single game, but when he did play, he would deliver. And ultimately, he wouldn't actually retire in MLS. He would go back to PSG where he played a couple seasons, and then he would end up retiring. Everyone remembers the moment he was crying on the pitch, all that good stuff. But still, what Beckham brought to MLS, trophies to Galaxy, commercial success. He brought a bunch of eyes to the league. He paved the way for more of his English compatriots as well as other footballing stars to come and join the league. Beckham's time in MLS was a huge success without a shadow of a doubt. And now at the moment with MLS, right, we have players like Messi and Suarez and Jordi Alba and all these guys who are currently playing in MLS. It's gonna be interesting to see how they end up doing. Of course, you guys can let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did these guys flop or did they not? Who did I miss out on? I know there's a ton of other players who played in MLS who I didn't touch on today. So if you have anyone that you're thinking about, anyone who I missed out on, let me know in the comments down below. Maybe I can talk about it in a future video. And if you got to this point of the video, boys, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you boys for watching. Peace.